The first day of the year is not neutral. What you wear speaks before you ever pray. Why do ancient occult orders mark January 1st with colors? I was trained to read spiritual atmospheres by sight alone. You think clothing is harmless, but spirits recognize signals. Tonight, a hidden door is about to be exposed. Color is not decoration. Color is communication. Before words are spoken, before prayers are lifted, before intentions are declared, color speaks. When I was inside satanic systems, we were trained to read people instantly, not by their faces, not by their emotions, but by what they wore. You were never taught this, and that ignorance was intentional. Every major occult order understands that colors carry frequency, not symbolism, frequency. They shape atmosphere. They attract or repel spiritual activity. They signal alignment. On January 1st, this principle intensifies because the first day of the year functions like a spiritual gateway. It is a threshold. What passes through that threshold sets momentum. We called it atmospheric anchoring. Whatever frequency is introduced at the gate is what stabilizes for the season ahead. That is why rituals are done on specific days. That is why altars are dressed with colors. That is why candles are never random. And that is why your clothing on January 1st is not neutral. You may think you are just getting dressed, but the spiritual realm reads it as a declaration. Inside the system, we were taught something chilling. Spirits do not wait for permission. They respond to signals. And color is one of the clearest signals you can send. Dark colors were used to mute spiritual sensitivity. They created heaviness. They suppressed discernment. They stabilized oppression. Certain reds were used to activate conflict cycles, not passion. Conflict, anger, bloodline tension, repeating arguments. Muted grays were used to signal stagnation, delay, a year where nothing moves but nothing breaks either, just slow spiritual suffocation. White, when misused, was dangerous because false purity attracts counterfeit peace. You were never taught this because knowledge gives authority, and authority threatens systems that profit from your confusion. On January 1st, the atmosphere is thin. Spiritual activity is heightened. Patterns are being written. That is why so many people feel strange that day. Heavy, emotional, anxious for no clear reason. You are sensing the shift, but you don't know how to respond. Inside the occult, January 1st was not celebrated. It was managed. Because whoever controls the opening controls the flow. We would observe neighborhoods, families, individuals, what they wore, how they presented themselves, what frequency they unknowingly agreed with. You might be shocked to hear this, but spirits recognize consistency. If you wear the same type of color during moments of transition, patterns form. That is why some people start every year hopeful and end it exhausted. The atmosphere was wrong from the beginning. You prayed, you fasted, but you ignored the signal you sent before you did either. Clothing does not replace prayer, but it can contradict it. You cannot declare peace while wearing a frequency of warfare. You cannot ask for clarity while dressed in spiritual noise. This is not superstition. It is alignment. The enemy thrives on imbalance, small contradictions that weaken authority. You speak faith, but your presentation invites confusion. You ask for breakthrough, but your signal stabilizes delay. And you wonder why the year feels like resistance from the first week. On January 1st, you are announcing what you are open to, not verbally, spiritually. That day functions like a spiritual profile picture for the year, and spirits pay attention. This is why some people experience unusual attacks early in the year. Sudden discouragement, unexplainable heaviness, financial pressure that appears too quickly. The door was opened before they even realized the door existed. You were never meant to be afraid of this knowledge. You were meant to use it. The power was never in the color alone. The power is in conscious alignment. When you understand what you are doing, the rules change. Spirits cannot manipulate what is intentionally submitted to God, but they can exploit what is careless. This is why the Bible speaks about putting on garments, not as fashion but as positioning. Garments of praise, garments of righteousness, armor, covering. Language the occult understands but fears when believers activate it consciously. January 1st is not about luck. It is about authority. And authority begins with awareness. You are not powerless. You were uninformed. And that changes now. Not every door opens with permission. Some open with agreement. And agreement does not always sound like words. Sometimes it looks like color. Inside satanic systems, we were taught a rule that never failed. Spirits move where they are welcomed. And welcome is established through frequency. January 1st is one of the most dangerous days for unconscious agreement because people are relaxed, celebratory, unaware. They think the war starts later, but the positioning happens first. Certain colors are not evil by nature, but when worn at spiritual gateways, they amplify specific atmospheres. That is why timing matters. Deep blacks, when worn on January 1st, were understood as absorption tones. They do not project, they absorb. They pull in emotional residue, spiritual heaviness, lingering oppression from the previous year. This is why some people feel like the past follows them into the new year. They changed the calendar, but not the frequency. In occult practice, black was used during closing rituals. Never openings, because it seals, it traps, it holds. When worn unconsciously on January 1st, it can stabilize unresolved cycles, old grief, old anger, old fatigue. You feel like you started the year tired, and you don't know why. Certain reds were treated with extreme caution. Not all red, specific shades. Dark crimson tones were activation colors, used to provoke reaction, conflict, emotional volatility. When worn during transition days, they signal readiness for battle even when no battle is required. That is why some people step into the new year already fighting. Arguments appear suddenly. Misunderstandings escalate fast. Peace feels fragile. They didn't choose chaos. They signaled readiness for it. Gray was one of the most dangerous colors in spiritual warfare. Not because it is dark, but because it is neutral. Neutrality is a lie in the spirit. Gray was used to create delay, stagnation, years where nothing collapses but nothing grows. People wearing gray during major transitions often experience slow suffocation. No breakthroughs, no major failures, just constant waiting. And waiting drains hope faster than loss. In the system, we call this silent suppression. White was never what people thought it was. True white carries authority. But false white invites deception. Cheap whites, dull whites, unintentional whites. They project purity without power. This attracts counterfeit peace, comfort without growth, calm without authority, People feel fine, but nothing changes. This is why some believers feel spiritually safe but fruitless, protected but unproductive. The enemy does not always attack loudly. Sometimes he pacifies. On January 1st, these colors amplify their influence because the day is a spiritual reset point. What you introduce first has leverage. But there is another side you were never told. There are colors that disrupt monitoring, colors that repel interference, colors that strengthen spiritual authority when worn intentionally. The system feared believers who understood alignment. Because once alignment is intentional, manipulation collapses. Certain blues were used as boundary colors. They stabilized peace without passivity, clarity without coldness. They signaled order. In occult surveillance language, blue was treated as a low-access frequency. Spirits could observe but not influence. That is why authority figures instinctively gravitate toward it. Uniforms, institutions, structures. Gold tones were not about wealth. They represented governance. When worn consciously, they signal stewardship, responsibility, maturity, not greed. Authority. Green was restoration-focused, growth, renewal, healing cycles, but only when worn with intention. Otherwise, it becomes ambition without grounding. This is why knowledge matters. Uninformed use invites chaos. Informed alignment releases authority. January 1st magnifies whatever you choose. You cannot stop the spiritual realm from responding, but you can decide what it responds to. This is not about obsession. It is about awareness. You don't need fear. You need clarity. Because the moment you act intentionally, the rules shift. Spirits cannot override conscious authority. They can only exploit carelessness. This is why believers who understand positioning walk differently. Their year feels different from the first week. Resistance does not disappear, but confusion does. And confusion is the enemy's greatest weapon. You were never meant to stumble into a year. You were meant to enter it. An entry requires intention. Every year has a door. Most people walk through it blindly. January 1st is not symbolic. It is structural. In the spirit realm, time does not flow evenly. There are pressure points. Moments where decisions carry multiplied weight. January 1st is one of them. Inside occult systems, we were taught to never treat that day casually. Not because of superstition, but because of pattern formation. The first signal establishes the baseline. Whatever frequency dominates at the opening becomes the reference point for everything that follows. This is why the first week of the year often predicts the tone of the months ahead. People dismiss it as coincidence. It is not. We called it year imprinting. And imprinting does not require full rituals. It requires agreement. Agreement can be silent, subtle, unconscious. What you wear, what you tolerate, what you entertain, what you normalize. These are not small choices at a gate. They are declarations. Spirits do not need your theology. They respond to structure. If confusion is present at the opening, confusion has legal access. If heaviness dominates, resistance gains leverage. If clarity and authority are established, interference weakens. This is why some people face unusual resistance immediately in January. It feels aggressive, personal, targeted, because the year was marked as accessible. Inside the system, we were trained to watch for unguarded entries. People who stepped into the year emotionally exposed, spiritually casual, unaware of alignment. They became easy targets not because they were weak, but because they were open. January 1st is when monitoring intensifies. Patterns are assessed. Boundaries are tested. Resistance levels are measured. What you project on that day determines how much pressure is applied later. This is why clothing matters here more than on any random day. It is not about fashion. It is about first signal dominance. The spirit realm honors first fruits, first declarations, first posture. The enemy understands this principle deeply. That is why distractions are strongest at the beginning. Fatigue, hangovers, emotional carryover from the past year. You are pushed to start the year drained, because a drained entry weakens authority. When your body is tired, your spirit is less guarded. Signals leak. This is why awareness is power. When you consciously decide how you enter, resistance recalibrates. I watched this shift happen in real time. There were individuals we monitored for years. Patterns were predictable. Attacks landed consistently. Then something changed. Their entry changed. Not louder prayers, not dramatic fasting. Alignment. They stopped entering unconsciously. They began treating January 1st as a spiritual checkpoint. Their atmosphere hardened, interference dropped. Attacks became indirect and weaker. Not gone, but less effective. Because authority was established early. You must understand this. The enemy does not fear enthusiasm. He fears order. Order removes access. Color, posture, intention, these are ordering tools. This is why Scripture emphasizes doing things decently and in order, not emotionally, structurally. When you align your outer actions with inner authority, you close loopholes. January 1st exposes loopholes. That is why the day feels spiritually loud to some people. They sense pressure, but don't know why. You are not imagining it. The atmosphere is being negotiated. The good news is this: you are not late. Authority can override access, but it requires intentional positioning. Once authority is established, patterns can be broken mid-year, but it is easier to establish than to repair. That is why this message matters now. You are not being given superstition. You are being given strategy. And strategy turns chaos into order. You do not drift into victory. You enter it with alignment. And alignment begins at the gate. Knowledge without action is still vulnerability. Awareness must become alignment. Inside satanic systems, we feared one type of believer above all others. Not the loudest, not the most emotional, but the most intentional. Intentional believers are difficult to monitor, difficult to predict, difficult to access. Because intention closes doors before spirits can test them. This is where everything changes for you. January 1st is not about obsession over colors. It is about conscious positioning. When you understand that your presentation speaks, you stop being careless with it. You don't drift into the year, you enter it. Authority is not declared once. It is established through consistency. The mistake many people make is overcorrecting, fear-driven decisions, anxiety-based rituals. That still gives power to confusion. True authority is calm, clear, deliberate. When you choose what you wear with prayer and intention, you are not submitting to rules. You are exercising dominion. The enemy does not fear your clothing. He fears your awareness behind it. Because awareness removes unconscious agreement. This is the key. Spirits cannot enforce what you never agreed to. An agreement is broken the moment intention replaces carelessness. You do not need to copy anyone. You do not need superstition. You need alignment with truth. Ask yourself this before you enter the year. Does what I'm presenting match what I'm praying for? If you are asking for peace, project order. If you are asking for clarity, avoid noise. If you are asking for growth, align with stability. This is not legalism. It is wisdom. The Bible speaks constantly about readiness, being clothed, being prepared, standing firm. These are not metaphors only. They are positioning language. When you align inward faith with outward action, authority locks in. This is why some people walk through chaos untouched, not because chaos avoids them, but because access is denied. Spirits test boundaries. They retreat from certainty. When you step into the year aware, resistance recalibrates, pressure lessens, confusion fades. The year may still challenge you, but it will not control you. That is the difference. You were never meant to be reactive. You were meant to be established. The enemy counts on believers underestimating small decisions because small doors create big access. But today, that pattern breaks. You are no longer entering blind. You are entering informed. And informed believers are dangerous to darkness. This is how cycles end. Not with noise, but with order. Not with fear, but with authority. Not with superstition, but with alignment. You are not stepping into another year by accident. You are entering with awareness and authority. What once worked against you loses access today. Confusion no longer leads your steps. Your atmosphere is no longer negotiable. You enter aligned, guarded, and established. This year responds to you because you now know who you are.